What's up, guys? This is Jakob. I'm content AI manager and helping entrepreneurs around the world with their content strategy using AI technology to produce content. Welcome to the first Remas live talk. Very excited to speak with Andeed Ma, who's the president of Remas and also who is a contributor for different publications like for Swiss Cognitive, also a keynote speaker, and also a contributor for the AI journal about AI risk. So very excited to speak today with Andeed about AI risk. So welcome to the show, Andeed.
Hey, thank you, Jakob, for inviting me.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. It's been a pretty hot day in Singapore. So I'm basically based in Singapore right now, and really excited to be on this show. To share a little bit more about the areas of risk management, right, as well as the field of AI and the wonders of that, right? So
Yes.
yeah, of course, I
Yes,
think
very excited.
for some of the audience to know a little bit about what RIMAS is, I think in a nutshell, RIMAS is the Risk and Insurance Management Association of Singapore, right? So it's a long name, but what we believe is everyone is a risk manager, and we have a very strong um, heritage, right? This association has been founded back in 1988, right? And we have since been following the mission of educating, sharing about risk, right, with our risk community, right? Talking a lot around four major pillars of risk, right? Fundamentally, we talk about operational risk, financial risk, hazard risk, and also strategic risk. And you realize that these four risks has never go away, right? In fact, every industry, everyone who is still living, breathing, you will, in one way or another, face this issue, right? So I guess this is something that I am very passionate about, and it's also something that's evergreen. It doesn't go away. It's always there, to help people to mitigate risk. Not asking you to go zero risk, right? It's not going to happen, but really how to bring it down to the lowest, right? So that it helps companies to be successful, right? It also help individual, to avoid some of the unforeseen circumstances of unfavorable outcomes. Yeah. So that is fundamentally RIMAS.
Yeah. So already super interesting. So was the defining moment where you said, okay, I have to, I mean, it's not naturally that I wake up and say, okay, I'm a risk manager. I have to think about the risks. So I'm more the optimistic guy and saying, hey, this will succeed and things like that. But was there for you a defining moment where you said, okay, I I have to think about the risks, or this is an important topic because was an event or something that happened in the past with, within your business life or
Yeah.
something? Okay.
Yeah. So I think fundamentally risk is something that it is less of to most of the people is more reactive right now, but the spirit of risk is actually more proactive. So I
Okay.
chanced upon RIMAS when I was with a company that deals with marine engineering works. So it's highly hazardous. That was like really my first job back then as a project engineer. And I was able to join a particular event which is focusing on business continuity. And that was how I actually met the then president, who was also who is actually still within RIMAS, right? He's actually one of the founding members of RIMAS, and he's also right now part of the council, still guiding me along as a very young leader for this association. And yes, risk has since been, the concept of risk mindset has since been following me throughout my journey and my career. Right now I'm more of a technologist, right? And risk actually is even more important.
Yeah, definitely. So this brings us, I mean, you already mentioned it, technology. So you're also, I mean, an AI risk expert. So you're niching this down. So risk has many facets or many niches, and you're in the niche of AI, which also the reason why we spoke in the first place.
Yep.
So
Yep.
before we go into the topic of AI risk, can you define, or can you tell us your one of your oldest memories when it comes to AI? What was it?
Well, I guess many different people has different I would say origins of AI, right?
Yeah.
Of course, I personally like to trace it back all to maybe in 1942 when there was an American science fiction writer called Isaac Asimov, right? He published this short story around Run Around. So I think there was also a Netflix sort of content that talks about that. But
Yeah.
what really brings out in that show, right, also in that story was the three laws of robotics, right, where he was talking about the first law being a robot must not injure a human being, right, or actually cause a human being to come to harm, right, as a result of his inactivity, right? And there's also the second law where a robot must follow the human commands unless such orders conflicts with the first law. And of course, the last law talks about the robot must protect its own existence unless the self-defense conflicts with the first and second law. So these three laws of robotics really influence the early generations of scientists, right? In this field of robotics first, then it went into artificial intelligence, then computer science, and that actually brings about very famous people like Marvin Minsky, right, who is the American cognitive scientist, right? He co-founded the MIT AI lab, by the way, and we also probably heard about Alan Turing, right, the English mathematician, right, who actually really created this famous Turing test that we have all heard about. And now it is still a very important criterion to determine whether an AI is intelligent or not. So that's something really brings me really the oldest memory, right? And it's also the two AI winters that has happened prior to now, right? And really hope that we won't fall into the third winter, and we want this oldest memory to be a memory, right? To be a history, while we really can progress with AI with risk in mind.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's really the oldest memory of I have.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting point also with AI winter. So when you look back at the AI history, there are ups and downs where AI was not was not a topic, a real topic, and yeah, there's always this danger that you fall in this winter and then nobody is speaking about it. Nobody is using it to some degree, and yeah,
Exactly.
that would be
Yeah.
not good. So
I mean,
that's the
like,
reason why we do this. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. I mean, like, yeah, for your, like for winter one, right? It was fundamentally the technology wasn't there, wasn't really ready. Things
exactly.
like computer vision, machine translation is very common now. But back in the mid 60s, 70s, this were very tough, right? And there were a lot of failures. So the governments that basically do not trust, right, in UK and in US, right? So there were too many disappointments. So you can see these are the progression of technology as well. And along the way, it comes with risk, and people manage risk, and they decided to pull back, right? So that's the reason why I really feel strongly about the importance of AI risk, right, in order to keep the AI sustainable in the longer run.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool. So how do you define AI risk? So what is it when you explain this to somebody who never heard about this? How do you explain it?
So I think AI risk is really a very broad category, right? So, and being in REMAS, right, as I've shared our four mission, right, I often like to basically, um, I would say, really cross pollinate, right, the idea of AI and risk management together. And therefore, I typically categorize them into four major interacting TNETs, right, which I would call the AI operation risk, the AI financial risk, AI hazard risk, and AI strategic risk. So in my own definition, right, these are the four pillars, right, I feel that defines AI risk. And just to give you a little bit more, right, around
Mhm.
maybe taking the example of AI strategic risk, what do I mean by that? When you talk about strategic risk, we can actually further funnel down into identifying the risks that were, say, brought forward by AI affecting people and the team, right? Or affecting the market and the customer that you are serving, right? And perhaps even the technology risk itself, if there's any possibility of getting human harm, which then breaks the first law of the robotics in Asimov's work, right? So I think these are what really these four pillars that I just mentioned would be a very good starting point to define what is AI risk. Yeah.
The fourth one, what was it? The AI hesitant, or what?
So AI operation risk, AI
Okay.
financial risk, AI hazard risk. So for example,
hazard.
hazard, yes, your health and safety, that falls under hazard, right? So and AI strategic risk, right?
Okay,
So
got it. Okay. Yeah, 4 pillars. And I mean, how do you identify a risk? So are you looking at companies and then scanning these 4 pillars? So what is the method that you use to identify, to say, okay, this is an AI healthy business, but there are more risks. Do you have an approach how to do this?
yeah, of course, we under REMAS, we actually have half of our council members is in the ISO 31000, right? Technical committee. And as you know, ISO 31000 is a risk management guideline, right? It has a series which in the 31010 talks about the use of risk assessment methods. So there are actually different methods that we can deploy, right, to assess a certain types of risk, right? So one of the biggest risks, for instance, is the opacity of processes that were generated by, say, artificial neural networks, right? It has often been what we call black boxes, and these are again what most organizations will guard heavily on, right? And in fact, when they are doing that, there's a very strong hidden risk that is building up, right? With the increasing amount of data that's fed into it, and this could dangerously create an AI that we cannot explain, right? And when you cannot explain, you cannot govern, and when you cannot govern, it resulted in unforeseen harms to society and environment. So I think at this point in time, it is never too late to perform AI auditing, right? So AI auditing also encompasses some of these assessment methods that we just mentioned, right? In order to help organization to be aware, right, that certain things can be tracked, right? Certain things that can't be tracked has to be, say, interviewed, quantified through surveys, right? Perhaps identifying the cause and effect, right? So using fishbone diagrams and etc. So all these tools, right, that I've just mentioned, right, are different approaches companies can actually choose to adopt and use it as a framework, right, following a principle, right, and then identify the risk that wasn't surfacing through naked eyes. So yeah, so that's a I mean there's actually a whole chunk of assessment methods. I think I will bore most of the audience here, but I kind of highlighted a couple of them. Things like interview and survey is actually one of those methods to collect informations that you can't quantify, right? And through the information that you collected, right, you can actually plot into, say, fishbone diagrams, right, to find out root causes, right. So that will help to reduce certain opacity, right, in terms of how some of the software engineers are carrying out in designing the algorithms, right. And perhaps most of us have heard things like algorithmic risk management. Yeah. So in that light, it can be well reduced, right, in terms of the risk. Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned fishbone diagrams, or is that right that I understood this?
Yeah. So fishbone diagrams are like a cause and effect diagram. So
Yeah.
it allows individual to identify the cause, the sub causes, right, of certain problems, all right, and how that actually roll up to the main problem. Yeah. These are some of the very well established tools, right? But again, tool has to be applied correctly, right? So so that's something that it requires someone to go through a proper training and enablement, right, in order to perform the proper auditing processes.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned already something very interesting. So an AI that we can't explain. So
Yeah.
what risks do you see when it comes to AI? So what are so can you maybe mention the 3 or 4 major risks that you see in different niches and different industries that you so far experienced?
Okay, I think in that context, right, maybe I start off with regulations of algorithms and organizations, right?
Okay.
So as we all know, AI is inherently impartial and unbiased, but is it? Right? So again, we cannot rule out the fact that um, there is still a possibility of biasness in AI based system, because
Yeah.
some of the bias index that has been used within some of the neural network, for instance, are set by humans, and humans has a certain form of perceptions of certain things. Because at this present moment, there isn't a gold standard of what is bias and not bias, right? So in fact, any bias that is presented in input data that is used to train, say, AI system will remain, and in some cases, because it remains in that black box, it gets compounded. As we all know that, the deep learning, the process of deep learning is a very compounding nature, right? And when that compounded, you create scenarios where the AI starts to judge, right, on, say, colors. So let me give you an example. There,
Yeah.
there are research that found that self-driving car sensors, especially in places like US, right, are better at identifying lighter skin tones as compared to darker skin tones. I'm sure most of us has watched The Social Dilemma on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
Sorry, on Netflix, and and
Netflix. Yeah.
and that is a true fact, right? And there are a lot of you know advocacy body trying to highlight this part about the types of images that we are using to train the algorithms, right? And that's only on self-driving cars. How about the judicious decision support systems, right? These are all legacy systems. These are all systems that could be racially biased, right? And they are based, don't forget, they are based on analysis that were from past rulings, right? They are based on historical rulings, right? That contains bias data. So that really forms the importance of why regulation is needed, right? At a later, in fact, now, not really later, on things like algorithms, how people are writing algorithms, and how organizations are using, right? I think the second problem that I see here is also the regulations of jobs, right? A lot of people talks about automation of industrial processes resulted in loss of blue collar jobs. But the thing is, the use of AI would also potentially reduce the need of white collars job, right? So even highly skilled professions. So that is a very important element of mindset change, right? Because the risk of losing a job, right, becomes a personal risk rather than an organization risk, right? And regulator may be able to basically prevent this, right? They can actually encourage firms to invest the money that is saved from use of AI or automation, right, into investing into education works, right, or investing into, say, self-service system, right? So these are some of the things that I feel that AI could actually create problems, yes, but also create opportunities. Yeah. So I think last but not least, the question was who this particular problem has no answer yet, right? So the question is who will watch the AI? Who will guard the guards, right? So AI will be used by government, used by businesses, used by individuals. Of course, in China, I think most of us probably heard about things like they have developed social credit systems, right? That they are heavily surveilling, watching their people. They're creating huge big data. They're using AI to try to create that trustworthiness, right? But that doesn't work in places like US and UK, right? Where you know it, you know, essentially the banning of facial recognition technologies are happening, right? Engineers are not able to work on certain technologies, certain devices, right? So you can see this is a question that governments hasn't had a has an answer to it because it involves democracy, it involves peace, right? If you spark a certain off balance kind of decision, then you actually created a higher risk of maintaining peace. So again, yes, risk management is happening as always, right? The balance between democracy and peace when it comes to who guards the guards themselves. Yeah, which is in this
Yeah.
case AI. Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. So one thing that I ask myself is when you're in trouble with your AI and you get a lawsuit or something, that somebody is unhappy with what you did,
Exactly.
and who's responsible for the AI? The CEO of the company or the developer who created the network,
Hmm.
the neural network? Who's in charge? Is that a question that you, or are there use cases that you know about, and about
Hmm.
this kind of question?
So I mean, this is really around AI governance, right? The
Okay.
idea of AI governance is where there should be a legal framework to ensure that AI technologies or subsystems or machine learning technologies are well researched, right, and developed with the goal of helping humanities to navigate the adoption of AI fairly, right? So this may inherently involve the need to perform, say, third-party audits, right, that allows independent auditors to represent the people or the humanities to build what we call the infrastructure of trust, right? And this infrastructure of trust will certify an AI system to be more trustworthy, perhaps to be less biased, to have respect for privacy, or to even generate ethical outcomes, or to enforce cybersecurity, or all in all to ensure safety to humanities. So, so my answer to that question is really around have organization, has C levels, right, has government consider the importance of auditing AI to achieve this certified AI system that have met those criteria that I just shared. So up to this point, I think it is still a very big question, honestly, Yakub, right? So whether
Yeah.
people will actually get themselves audited on all this to ensure that there's a fairness of the system, right? That this is a responsibility of the system and not a particular organization or particular stakeholder within the organization. Yeah. So that's something that I would say that there's still some mileage for us to achieve that, right? How do we make AI system, you know, to be responsible as well for the kind of risk that they generate? Yeah.
And but the current, so the status quo of an AI governance. So I know that in the US and in the UK there were some legal bills that are passed the government,
Yep.
But that's more the exception. So there are not many countries in the world who have a really legal framework. But
Yeah.
is there, or how do you see it? Are there countries who are more advanced when it comes to AI governance, or are they all waiting until something happens and then politicians react and create a legal framework, which is the typical way? But
Yep.
are there any countries in the world who think about this?
Well, I would say I mean in UK, I think everyone is doing very good job, right? In
Okay.
terms of following GDPR, right, as a gold standard, putting privacy first, right, and using privacy, right, as a way to navigate into the other areas of biasness, trustworthiness, cybersecurity, and the ethical outcomes, right? So, so that has been, I feel, a very, very good action that has been carried out by our fellow researcher and also our fellow stakeholders that is in the UK side, right? So I would say in APAC right now, it is still driven in a very traditional manner, right? It is still the fault of the leader of the organization, for instance, right? When there are damages incurred, like or there are collateral damages, or there are any form of legal breaches, right? It unfortunately it is not the problem of the system, but it is the problem of the person who approves, right, the running of the system. So the question is that a very fair judicial decision, right? So um, still subjected to debates, to be honest, right? So people
Yeah.
got to have a particular framework, right, around what they believe in first. Then they set values and principle around the framework before they put in place techniques to execute the framework, right? So I feel that this um, hasn't been done, to be honest, yet in especially Southeast Asia markets, right? Where yes, Singapore is more mature, but surrounding us are all emerging countries, right? They are all still developing, and it is very tough for them to actually have the time and space, right, to think about even AI governance related topics. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so I would say it's really very different from a maturity standpoint.
Yeah. And in your opinion, who are actors for building an AI governance? So the governments, politicians, um, non-profit organizations, or so like RIMAs,
Yep.
and also, yeah, I don't know, maybe technology companies who are using AI. Would that, yeah, okay.
Yep. I
These
I would say good question, right, Yaku? So there shouldn't
always.
be one there shouldn't be one single entity
Mhm.
that should be responsible, because everyone that you just mentioned there, right, are involved in this AI ecosystem
Yeah.
in one way or
Yeah.
another, right? They are all actors of a certain function, of a certain inputs, and also they are also beneficiaries of a certain outputs.
Yeah.
So I don't feel that there should be like one organization or one entity that should be responsible, but it is then again and it right very tough to get everyone involved. So the best way is to really have industry practitioner with say non-profit bodies like RIMAS, right, where we drive a very neutral voice, right, and we can deliver this voice, right, to say the nation funders, right, which could be the government, right. We can deliver this voice to uh, commercial funders, right. So they are the one who spend or kind of like really contribute to the GDP, right, to influence um, the advocation of AI governance, right? So, and you can see why this particular event is important here, because we have to start talking about it, be it with my fellow peers here or with yourself who is based in Munich, right? To really exchange ideas around the importance of this aspect of AI governance. It can be as simple as even AI ethics. In fact, I just had a call yesterday with someone from Montreal, right, who focuses on AI ethics. His definition of AI ethics and mine is kind of different, but we're all working towards the same objective, which is for the society, for the humanities. Right? So you can see these are all conversation that has to be sparked, right? And then the next action would be, how do we then consolidate these ideas and put in place a technique to execute those actions with risk management in mind? Yeah. So risk management in mind is, example, we don't want to be too lopsided that we kill democracy. We don't want to be too lopsided that we kill peace. Right. So that one is not a one-man job for sure.
Yeah. Okay, you already mentioned it twice. The topic of AI ethics. Can you shortly describe? So, how do you define AI ethics?
For me, I would say, like I mentioned, is really it's almost similar like how we create risk management frameworks, right? It starts off with a set of values, right, and followed by how the value translate into principles that people can adopt as a form of a mindset, so that everyone is striving towards that principle. And based on that principle, we come up with methods, right, to to be able to employ widely, and through accepted standards of what is right and wrong, right, in order to guide a moral conduct in the development and use of AI technologies. Yeah. So the key thing here is, what's the values, right? What's the values that we care about in that particular ecosystem that we are in, right? And with their values, how do we translate to a principle that can guide people's mindset to carry out the execution part based on, right, a widely accepted standard? So for instance, in RIMAS, we really focuses on the use of risk management standards like ISO 31000, which comes into play. And we put in place like risk assessment methods like 31010, right, to better manage the rights and the wrongs with the various stakeholders, organizations, and verticals. Yeah, so that's really how I define AI ethics at this present moment. It could change. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that I ask myself is, you spoke about AI governance, and this reminded I'm a political scientist. I studied political science, and I had one really awesome session about global governance, which all these ideas about this concept are popping up now. Is there a global organization like, RIMAS is focused, is in region APAC and in Singapore, but is there a global organization which speaks about AI risk management? Is there one?
I think the only global organization is the ISO body, right? The ISO committee that focuses on the different pillars. So, the International Standard Organization is really the one that brings together all the participating nations, right? Basically, gather all their opinions, gather all their values, principles, and methods to have an agreement of how to do certain things, right? Or what we call a gold standard of what is perhaps right or wrong from a moral standpoint, or what is right or wrong when it comes to addressing risk-related issues. So, like I mentioned, operation, financial, hazard, and also strategic, right? So these 4 pillars, right? There are things that people set the values and the principles and an approach to address it, but each of the entities may do it differently. But these different nation bodies should come together to agree upon one. And right now, the only organization that kind of really does that, right, and people care about, right, people really kind of really follow, is the International Standard Organization body. Yeah. So that's what also REMAS is about as well, where we involve heavily in that space as well. Right. So we create our own opinions, our standards, and we bring it on board to be debated, to be challenged, right, as a nation.
Yeah.
So so that's really one body that I feel has been doing very well, right? As you know, I also don't just look at AI, right? They look at everything in the world, literally.
Yeah. Awesome. But they don't give legal framework, so it's just
Yes,
so to
it's
say
a guideline.
guideline or recommendation. So for
Yes.
okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you realize that some of the guidelines will sort of really guide how people practice, right? And through the through the popular way of choosing certain way of doing things, right? That forms, say, a base, right, for why a certain legal framework should be structured. As you know, certain legal frameworks are also changed due to landmark cases, right? Due to the consideration of multiple dimensions, multiple stakeholders, kind of decision making process. Yeah. So I would say it's still a very solid foundation, right? Everything starts with a guideline, right? So the thing is, when there's no guideline, people are lost. But how people use the guideline to execute, that's the variant. And when there is a consistency in the variant, that's when a legal framework can be set upon, to govern it, right? And interestingly, this is where auditing comes in, because when auditing kicks in internally or externally, data are collected, and when data are collected, data can then be used, right, by the legal system to design the framework, right, the philosophy, and also the way they're going to judge. That's their method. Right?
Yeah.
So it's still following that three parts: value, philosophy, value, principles, and techniques.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we make a cut here. I mean, this is very global and frameworks, standard guidelines. Maybe we make the step to the real entrepreneurs out there. So the small and medium business owners who are doing the business, doesn't matter what business, but everybody, in my opinion, so that's really what I believe in, can use to some degree AI to make their lives easier. And can you maybe give lessons or can give advice? How do you think should small, medium enterprises or entrepreneurs who own their own business use AI for their own business? Can you give us cases or give us examples how to enrich their life? Because I mean, yes, there's some risk, but there are also a lot of opportunities, right? With AIs. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, but I would say right now there are more risk than opportunities.
More risk than opportunities?
Yes, because the
Okay.
thing here is, I feel strongly that a lot of businesses or even business owners, they are not thinking the use of AI in the right frame of mind, right? In the sense that I think before jumping into considering the use of AI in your business, first, you should be identifying a problem or multiple problems that you're trying to solve first. The thing about what is happening right now in the business world, people are crowded by this term artificial intelligence, right? People are reaching out to consultant and say that, hey, Yakub, you're the AI consultant. I want an AI right now for my business. is there an opportunity to you or a risk, right? So you can see this kind of scenario is actually happening very rampant in a very rampage manner, right? And it's actually quite disturbing. Why? The thing about AI is, as we all know, with any other technology, right? When a technology is not being designed or deployed in the right manner, it comes with risk, right? It could be collecting data, right, that are not meant for a certain purposes, and that breach AI ethics, right, in one way or another. Or it could be collecting data that is being used um, for not the intended purpose, right? And this stems from the root cause. So root cause analysis, by the way, is also a big topic in risk assessment methods within REMAS, right? So we we strongly believe that business owners should first identify the problems that they are trying to solve first. And some problems are just simple enough to be perhaps not solved by AI, right? So there is always automation, right? So automation is not AI, by the way, right? And it could also be perhaps solved by simple Excel spreadsheet, right? It is only when you observe that the problem gets bigger, and bigger here, I mean, it could start when you could start quantifying your pains, and that the pains are causing you to not achieve a certain level of what you call done. So everyone basically buy something to do, right? To get something done. But that degree of doneness is not achieved, right? Or it's not achieved fast enough. Then you start to consider, is artificial intelligence suitable for my business, right? Is it that, we have too much data that all our automation systems are not talking, right? Is it that we have too much data and the current processes are too manual, right? Or is it that we are not collecting the data in the right manner, right? Should we be deploying a camera, right, that can help us to collect data in a more consistent manner and feed in information such that there is suitable outputs that we can use the output for some other purposes, right? So you can see these are all questions that business owners typically do not think through or do not
Yes.
ask, because
Yes.
all they care about is build an AI for me. I need this to bring me X amount of revenue. So that is really something that I'm pretty worried, and it's one of the biggest risks, I think, at this present moment when it comes to using our AI for business.
I mean, yeah, let's take my example. I mean, I'm self-confident enough to get feedback from you. So I'm using GPT-3 technology to creating blog articles and social media captions. So I never thought about AI risk until I met you. I thought, hey, cool, I can create blog articles much faster and can save time. And yeah, I create 60% or 70% of my blog articles with GPT-3 and
Nice.
save time. That's the main thing that I focus on. So you can tell, are there any risks that I don't see when I'm
Yep.
using GPT-3? Okay.
In fact, Yakub, you see, GDP3 came from GDP2, right?
Yes.
And there same thing. Earlier on when I mentioned about the self-driving car thing, right? There were data that were collected way before, right? And the data that were used to train the GPT-2, right, that then now move to GPT-3, right? Whether those data are still able to decipher, right, an accurate or well-informed article that you intended to write. So here we are looking at a potential reputation risk. So for instance, if there are certain ways of writing or certain kind of words, right, that the current AI system that you're using generates a certain kind of commands, right, that you perhaps did not have the time, to review every single article, right? I'm sure if you have time to review every single article, then you might not want to use the system, right? You might as well write yourself, right? So the point here is the article may be interpreting what you intended to write a different manner, and that potentially could result in a certain kind of reputation risk, because there are people who read it and may not agree with it, right? Or may find that informations are, not original, or are some other things. So these are just example, right, Yakub? So, and that could put sort of like um, your reputation at stake, right? Especially you're using your name, right? So I think this is just an example, right? Don't take it too too seriously, right? But I would say there is always an underlying risk, right? When we lack that human elements, right? And the kind of inputs that we feed into training the system, right? And the outputs that is coming out, right? So my biggest fear is always, what happens if the outputs is not what I want and I do not know that has happened? I think the biggest risk is when I do not know. Yeah. So that's something that I hope to share with you and some of the audience as well, right? I think the part about do not know, right, has been prominently one of the biggest risks, right, when it comes to AI. Of course, we have heard Tesla in the early phases crashing, right, and there are fatality, right. You can see these are, even at a machine level, there are things that we do not know, right, and we place a lot of trust in it, and when the trust gets broken, right, the risk gets compounded. So it goes back to my original sharing, right, about the compounded risk that could come, right, when we do not do a proper AI governance.
Yeah, and when you look into the future, now we're 2022, the coming 5 years maybe, or the coming this decade, okay,
Yeah.
until the end of the decade, what would you wish, or what do you think would be good milestones in order to create such a framework or a guideline internationally accepted? What must happen?
I think the first thing that probably must happen is awareness. So we need to really start educating, right? We need to start educating people about what AI governance is all about, right? Where it can be as simple as knowing that AI governance encompasses things like ethics, privacy, trust, bias, cybersecurity, right? So these are things that a lot of people do not know, right, or do not care, right? So how do we start talking about this, educating them to do the very first step, right, which is to get them to care about this topic, right? I think personally that is one of the, I would say, the hardest task, right? So because you see, it also depends on how many people are tuning in to this discussion that we have, right? So it is very difficult to really get every single one, right, to have that awareness, right? So, and therefore I feel that um, more experts, more advocates, right, should come together and work together. This is not about competing who is an expert, or who knows more, who knows better, who is more crystallized. No, I don't think so. Right? It's really about awareness, sharing what you know, bringing the community together, right? Build that value, right? Build that value. Once we know the value, everybody that is in the community knows the value. We set out a certain principle towards achieving the value. And that principles could easily be taught in schools, right? In education institutions, right? In private academy, right? So here is when you progress from awareness, right, to truly changing the mindsets. And changing the mindsets requires further educations, right? And these educations are not what I would term as still exploratory. No, these educations are solid principles, right? That you can understood, take it, and implement it, right? And that leads to my third point, which is to activate the right people, right, to start working on it. So the right people could be all the stakeholders, Yakub, you just mentioned, right? The government body, commercial people, the funders, right? The technologies adopter. Most importantly, the software developers and the data scientists, because traditionally these two groups of people, the politician and the data scientists, the tech guys, they do not talk, right?
Yes.
So you can see
Why?
awareness.
Why should they?
Yeah, I was really, I'm not surprised, because the thing here is, that there is always that part about, hey, you are being too philosophical, right? We are doing the real stuff. We are building the real stuff, right? But you see, when we create awareness, awareness could bring these two groups together. And in a session like this could involve maybe 10 people, right? We could have politician in this group, myself, some very well-known software champions, right? We could start discussing some real frameworks, real principles that we can come together to develop, right? Say a curriculum, right? That we can get support from the governments, from the commercial, and start to basically inculcate this principle. And once the principle has been given, that's when people start to put in place techniques and methods, right, to really activate what has been changed in their mind, right? So remember, the principal part is the changing of the mindset. And once all this has been done, my friend, it's all about acceleration, right? It's all about everyone is aligned. Let's get things done very quickly. But you can see that the journey from awareness, learning, and activation is going to probably take that 10 years that you were asking me. But the acceleration, once we hit that milestone of that 10 years, right, the acceleration will be in light speed. Yeah, so that's really what I look at as a trend, potentially in the next I would say 5 years. We are doing a very good job in awareness, right? The next maybe 6 to 7 years, on the 6th to 7th year, right, we will see a lot of very solid principles being set out, right? We will see a lot more, philosophies and government people and tech people working together. And that is a very strong indication that on the 10th year, we will accelerate. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's into my mind of the trend.
That's the job. That's our job. And I help you with the awareness thing. We have to create a lot of content, my friend.
Exactly. I mean, in fact, the next session, we should start inviting, like what I mentioned, people who has never want to talk about with a politician, or a politician who never wants to talk to a technical guy, or even a legal guy who has certain form of authority to shape the legal frameworks, right? To really start be aware of what is entailed in AI governance. Yeah.
Exactly. So we can speak about this after the live session.
For sure. For sure.
And some brainstorming. That's cool. Okay, we're running a little bit out of time. So one last statement that you want to share with the audience, something that is important for you, or an advice maybe to people out there who are new in this field.
AI is not magic. AI is
Good.
common sense, right? And AI starts somewhere. So for those who are embarking onto AI right now, right, look at where your problem is. Where's the biggest problem? Basically, right now, lying in your business. Where are the biggest data sources? Always try to understand and define your problem statement clearly, and be able to determine whether is it addressable by AI or automation first. So that's what I hope everyone can bring it back. Yeah. So AI is not a magic.
Okay. Cool. Let's wrap this up. Thank you, Andeed. It was really a pleasure. This was the first live talk that we had for Remas. There will be also other topics we can discuss about this. Andeed, you stay please in the line for all the listeners and watchers. If you have any questions, Andeed is a real expert on AI risk management. So if you want to follow up with him, go to LinkedIn. He's very chatty. That's how we met the first time. And yeah, that's it for today. And yeah, thank you for all, and see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andeed.
Thank you.